What's up guys and welcome back to Tech Lab. Now today we're going to be playing Tech Catch Up and we're going to be catching up with a whole generation of CPUs that we missed during our break from PC building. Now when we got back into PC building we obviously started at the Ryzen stages, but before Ryzen there was a platform called the AMD FX and that's exactly the one we're going to be taking a look at today. Is this platform now totally dead for gamers? Well, that's what we're going to try and find out. Okay, so we actually got pretty lucky recently because somebody gave us a bunch of CPUs. Now these are AM3 plus AMD FX CPUs, and it's given us an opportunity to take a look at that whole generation and see how well it can actually game. The CPUs we've got on hand start from the 4-core to the 6-core and including the 8-core processors. But the one we actually specifically focused all our benchmarking around was the 8-core because the others we've been told are not actually that good anymore. Now we will get around to testing these at some point and I'm sure we'll do another video on it, so make sure you subscribe if you want to see that. But in terms of the 8-core processor, it is actually the one that we have boxed, and that's pretty cool because it makes it a little bit of a collector's piece if anything for us, and we can pop it on the back shelf so that you can see it going forward. The CPU that we are specifically focusing on is the AMD FX-8350. It was probably one of the more used and mainstream CPUs that we can find during our research, and it is an 8-core 8-thread processor with a base clock speed of 4.0 GHz. It is on the AM3 Plus socket and it was released in roughly around 2012. And if you were to buy it back then, you would have paid just under £200 for it, which is actually totally different to the AMD CPUs we see today, because this would have been one of the more high-end CPUs from AMD at the time. Considering the new 7000 series from AMD will cost you upwards of like £800 just for one of their high-end things, this probably actually now looks a bit of a bargain for its day. Now we use the term 8-core lightly because there is some controversy around, is it actually really an 8-core processor? Now we're not interested in going back in time to debate that, we're just interested in what it can actually do today. Now we've been using this for a week now and inside Windows it's actually pretty snappy, there's no issues at all with the processor or the system in general, it worked pretty well with Windows 10. And to see how well it would game, we actually paired it up with an NVIDIA GTX 1660 Super. It's probably one of the more faster graphics cards that we've got in stock, and we didn't want to bottleneck the CPU too much. We wanted to actually see how much it would do. So we run everything at our normal settings at 1080p high to see what it would do. So let's take a look at some of those benchmarks, and then we'll have a discussion around the results. as you can see from those results, we didn't actually have any issues with this CPU at all. I was actually pleasantly surprised at how well it performed in all the games that we actually tested, although there were some issues along the way. When it came to Cyberpunk, we got just as what we would expect from a GTX 1660 Super. It was roughly around a 47 average FPS, but there were issues with the 1% lows, dropping to as little as 5 for the 0.1. Doom Eternal was obviously a game that really shines in even older hardware now, and it showed excellent results with an average of 125 FPS, and the 1% lows on that one weren't actually too bad. A new game that we've added to our benchmarking list now is Horizon Zero Dawn, and again, this CPU performed perfectly well, getting an average of 58. Shadow of the Tomb Raider was where we saw some issue though, so even though we got an average FPS of 71, the 1% lows did take a dive, and you could actually tell that on the screen. There was a lot of stutter when the CPU was hitting 100%, and it didn't take away from the game too much. It was actually a pretty decent game to play, and you didn't notice it so much, but it was actually there. Stray was another title that actually performed really well, and I was quite surprised about this one because it's probably one of the newest titles on there, and for other older hardware that we've used, it can actually show its demandingness quite well, and other things tend to suffer quite a bit. Now, it didn't so much in the average FPS for this one, but it did when it came to those 1% lows, dropping as low as 8 on the 0.1%. So as you can see, it's not actually that bad. It performed way better than I actually thought, and I was actually quite impressed with the way that this CPU handled itself. It does have 125 watt TDP, but we had no issues cooling it with a standard AMD Wraith Max cooler. But of course, looking at those in isolation doesn't really tell us much about the platform itself. How much better was the Ryzen platform? So to find out, we actually put it against this one. Now this is an AMD Ryzen 1700, and it recently came out of our benchmarking rig in the replacement of a 5600G, which again we will be doing a video on soon, so make sure you subscribe if you want to see that. We decided to compare it against this Ryzen processor because it would have been the first one introduced after this generation of CPUs. It was the first one on the AM4 platform, and it was also an 8-core versus an 8-core, so we could get a more realistic view of what was happening. Now, to give it a quick synthetic test, we decided to run it through a Cinebench R23, and as you can see from the chart, the results were quite astounding. When it came to single core, there wasn't actually that much in it between the two CPUs. They were pretty good actually, and aligned pretty well. But when we hit the multi-core, you can obviously tell there is a big difference between the Ryzen architecture and the FX one. But of course, on this channel, we're more interested in the gaming results, so we ran all of the games again with the 1700 with as like-to-like system that we could to see what kind of a difference you would get in gaming. Now, when it came to games, the Cinebench results didn't exactly map one-to-one. In Cyberpunk, using the Ryzen 1700, we only saw a couple of frames per second difference, and that pretty much followed the pattern all the way across. One of the games that had the biggest difference was obviously Horizon Zero Dawn. It seemed to like the Ryzen architecture a lot, and we saw quite a bit of a boost there. But for all the others, it wasn't too bad, it wasn't too far apart, and you could pretty much get 60 FPS out of all of them. So regardless of the controversy around this processor and how much people have told me that they were totally rubbish back in the day, I actually think it's got a little bit of life left in it, especially if you compare it with the right graphics card. I was hugely surprised at how well this processor did, especially when it came to comparing it to one of the first gen Ryzens, and I'm sure if we compare it to one of the latest ones, it would actually get destroyed. But then again, we've got the price difference to take into consideration. Considering that the lowest Ryzen 7000 processor at the moment will cost you around £300 to £400, and this would have been one of the highest processors at the time, costing you under 200. It actually really puts things into perspective when it comes to the budget gamers. Now, I'm really glad that we actually took a look at this generation of board. It's one of the ones that I've been most excited for checking out. But if you are still running one of these, let us know in the comments what kind of experience you're having. Have you found that your platform is now coming to an end and you need to upgrade, or are you actually playing games perfectly fine? And if you are, what graphics card are you pairing with it? Because I would love to give it a go to see what I could get out of it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like this kind of content. And also remember to drop this video a like so we know to do more, and we'll catch you in the next one.